want to focus on two key things in this vlog, just to make it really specific and for anybody else that is maybe looking into these topics. So I'm going to cover my diagnosis, which is low AMH, and I'm also going to cover the treatment that we tried first that failed, which is the IUI. So yeah, we'll get into it, but first of all, as I am having a chilled day, I'm going to treat myself to some eye masks for this chit chat, and I'm also going to do my teeth whitening. So yeah, we'll be back. So if you're new here, welcome to my fertility diaries, where we're covering everything to do with my fertility journey. In episode 2, which is this episode, I'm going to be covering my diagnosis, which is low AMH, and the treatment that we had last year in November, which was an IUI. So just to talk through that process and what it means. I will cover a little bit of the backstory just in case you're new here. Last year I started having irregular periods, if not no periods at all. We wanted to start a family. We went to a private clinic to do some baseline tests just to try and find out what was going on with my body, and they gave me a diagnosis and said, you're going to need fertility treatment ideally if you want to start a family. So let's get into it. So I was tested. They did various hormone tests, internal scans to look at my ovaries and my tubes, and of that the consultant then came to us and said, your diagnosis is that you've got low AMH and irregular periods, which is an indicator of your struggles that you might have on a fertility journey, as well as the egg reserve that you hold, and the fact that you're not having periods likely means you're not ovulating regularly, which you need to do in order to boost your chances of getting pregnant. So what is AMH? Let's get into it, because all of the jargon meant nothing to me at first. I'm going to read this straight off of Google because I want to kind of give you the right information, but please note anything I say, like, I'm not an expert, is based off my own research, what I know, so please do your own research as well. But AMH, so anti-Müllerian hormone, is a hormone that indicates the number of eggs remaining in a woman's ovaries. It's measured in a blood test and can help assess ovarian reserve and fertility. So your AMH levels increase, I think, from birth to about 25. That's at your peak. And then they start to decline with age, becoming basically undetectable at menopause. So that's how that cycle works. Your AMH levels can essentially predict how well the ovaries will respond to certain hormones in fertility treatment as well. And you should have a normal level, I think, is above 16 p-mol, whatever that measurement means, and mine was about 3.2, so it's low. For my age especially, it's really low. So that was hard to hear, because that essentially means the little pot of eggs that my body is storing somewhere is super low, which when you're 27 years old, that's not what you expect to hear. They tell you at school, don't they, like, don't have sex without a condom because you'll get pregnant. There's multiple reasons why that's not solely true or easy, because you actually have a very... I keep touching these, don't I? They're definitely slipping, but it's fine. Where was I? Yeah, you have a very small window as a woman to get pregnant anyway in that cycle, and then there's all these other factors that play into it, like if you're actually releasing eggs. Are the eggs of a good quality? There's such a small percentage anyway that even if you are ovulating regularly and normally, that you will get pregnant in that window anyway. So it's not as easy. So yeah, that's my diagnosis, low AMH, which means I do need to think sooner rather than later about fertility treatment, which is what we're doing. But it just makes that whole process quite scary, because all of a sudden we went from knowing we want a family, getting married, and thinking that we had all this time. Yes, we were thinking about it, but we still thought we had time, to all of a sudden actually we've got to take action now, because we don't know what the next few years could look like. I don't know what that means for my body if my level's already low. Like, yeah, I don't know what it means. It could mean that, in a few years, am I just going to deplete to no eggs anyway? Like, I don't know. Lots of questions still to ask. So if anybody else is also in a similar position, if you've been diagnosed with low AMH, if you're having irregular periods, no periods at all, like, please drop me a comment, because I would love to know your experience. I'd love to know what's helped you, and maybe give something a go or do something different that I'm not already doing. So yeah, that's where we're at. That's my diagnosis. I'm currently on day 67 of the current cycle, and the bleed that I had at the start of that cycle was that the Provera bleed? Yeah, so that was when our IUI treatment had failed, and they'd given me Provera to induce a withdrawal bleed. And then after that, I had another small bleed, and then I've had nothing since. So I think that was in December time I had a bleed. So it's quite frustrating as well, because as a woman, I think we rely heavily, even though they're a pain, we know when our periods come that means our body is doing the normal thing that it should be doing on a regular basis. It almost feels like you're having a good, like, clear out. Is that the right word? I don't know, that's probably not the right word. But it feels normal to me to have a period, and when I'm not having a period, I do feel quite stressed, and I feel like my body is failing me. So yeah, not great. The other point to add here is that having low AMH, because that's an indicator of the eggs left in my, like, little pool in my reserve, it also means that for any fertility treatment, when they're trying to stimulate the egg growth, which you need for IVF, they basically give you drugs, I think, that force your ovaries to produce lots of eggs, or eggs that you have, so that they can collect them. It means the likelihood is, the percentage chances for me are going to be less in terms of the eggs I'll produce, because I don't have them there anyway. So it does mean there might be challenges for us on this IVF journey, and I still have, I think, lots of questions around that when we get to that, because I have low AMH. I just don't know what that means in terms of what the outcome will be, what they can try to make sure that we do get some eggs. So yeah, that's another point to think about and consider in all of this, is that this journey is going to be harder anyway because of my low AMH. Okay, we've moved location because I just wanted to be a bit comfier. The second thing that I want to talk to you about is the procedure that we had back in November last year, and that was the first thing they offered us in terms of fertility treatment for our situation. So we got our diagnosis in the August-September, which was low AMH, and it's probably worth saying, to get that diagnosis, like I said, we paid for some baseline assessments that did include my husband James, so we know that everything is within normal remit for him. And if anybody wants to know about the cost for any of these treatments, please let me know. I can do a separate video just on the costs for a UK private clinic. That's the dog nudging the table. Come and sit down then. Good boy. Boy. Right, they're both sleeping now down here, and hopefully they'll stay put. So yeah, those baseline assessments covered myself and James. So the outcome of my low AMH was that they said, you know, otherwise everything looks good. So it's sort of not unexplained infertility, because I do have a diagnosis of low AMH, but my tubes look good, my ovaries look good and healthy, so there's nothing that explains why I'm also not having periods. So they said, look, something that we can offer you before IVF, because that is expensive, is an IUI procedure. Again, I know I'm using lots of terminology that might mean nothing to you, so I will explain. And again, I've got the help of trusty Google, because I just want to give you the correct definition. So an IUI procedure is an intrauterine insemination, and it's a fertility treatment that involves placing the sperm directly into the uterus, also known as artificial insemination. So to put it bluntly, some people describe it basically as the turkey basting method, but there is way more science involved than that. So as part of that process, obviously I said, well, what happens because I'm not having periods? How do we make it work? So they give you a medication to essentially help your ovaries to produce follicles, eggs, and the medication that I was on was called letrozole. So the idea is that you take letrozole, I think it was in the first few days of a bleed, and then that helps get your body ready for producing eggs. Now, because I wasn't bleeding, we had to add in an additional step, so I had to take a drug called Provera. Again, yes, that is the same drug that I also think potentially made me lose my periods, but it's also in essence a drug that should induce a withdrawal bleed, and I had to bleed to get that lining out and to start the cycle process essentially. So I took Provera again, induced a withdrawal bleed, and then I started the Letrozole. Letrozole was 3 tablets a day. I think I was on the highest dose, so I was on 7.5 milligrams for the first 5 days of my cycle. I think they gave it to me for. And then once you finish Letrozole, you go into your clinic, and it's multiple times that I had to go in. I think it was maybe 3 times in the week after finishing Letrozole, and they do internal scans to check the eggs, and then essentially they're looking for what will be a lead follicle, and that should be the egg that then ovulates, is released into your body, ready for the IUI procedure. So I went in, I had my scans, there were a few follicles, but they were quite small. And I think after the 3rd scan, so over the course of that week, that's when, because you've had the medication, you should see signs of a lead follicle. It was on the 3rd scan, I think. They said that it wasn't looking great. It didn't look like I even had a mature follicle. And I knew at that point I could feel the lump in my throat. I could feel my heart sink, that I hadn't responded to the medication, it wasn't going to work. So I went in for one final scan. They said, look, come back in a couple of days, let's just see, you never know what might happen. And I went in, and James couldn't come with me actually, and I remember this day, I just got in the car afterwards and cried because it was awful. And I can talk about it now a bit more because I've processed it, I know where we're at right now and what our next steps are, but don't get me wrong, I still have good days and bad days. So went in for this final scan, and my follicles had actually gone the opposite way. They were just shrinking again. So she said, it's very unlikely you're going to ovulate. We can't, in good faith, do the procedure because you've not got an egg to do anything with. So I left that day feeling very deflated, very low. We'd essentially tried, the first thing that we'd tried had already failed. So we didn't even get to do the IUI procedure, but I'm still going to talk you through what would have happened. So, had there have been indication that I had a lead follicle and I was going to ovulate, they would then call James in, he would produce a sample, they take that sample and they wash it, that's what it's called, but what they're basically doing is taking the best of his sample, getting that ready for the procedure. They then insert a catheter into me, and they push the clean sample through the catheter and straight into your uterus. What they're doing with that is they're taking the best of the best and also getting it as close as possible to that egg that's come down, so that they hopefully have a better chance of meeting, but they're also giving you the best sample, the best version of. So as opposed to the natural way, which is all of it, they are taking what they deem as the best ones and popping them straight into contact with that egg. That's not to say that the egg will then fertilise, but they're getting it as close as they physically can. So that is essentially an IUI procedure. It's artificial insemination, like I mentioned, and that is offered to people as a first step because, one, it's cheaper, it's less invasive, and it's quite often offered to people with unexplained infertility because it's mimicking what would happen naturally but giving you a slightly better chance. It is worth noting though the percentage chances versus IVF of IUI are a third, and I think for a lot of couples that do IUIs it takes a few goes. Again, I'm not an expert, none of this is exact or fact, but just based on the information I've read, IUIs are less invasive, less expensive, but they can take a bit longer and a few more goes. The flip of that is IVF is more expensive, more invasive, but hopefully higher chances. So that's a bit of a recap, I guess, on my diagnosis, the treatment that we tried that failed, and then on that, it's worth saying that we were going to do another IUI. We had a consult after the failed one just before Christmas, and I was ready and willing to do another IUI, even though we can't really afford it. We would have found a way. But the consultant actually said to us, look, given your situation, given your AMH levels, it's just not worth forcing yourself to throw money at something that I don't really think is going to do anything for you. He said you are much better off either saving and putting that money into funding IVF yourself, or waiting and going through the IVF process on the NHS. So that's where we're at right now. Our next step is the pathway to NHS funding for the IVF. So we will talk about that hopefully a bit more in episode 3 when we're a bit further along that journey and a bit closer. As I mentioned in the last episode, I've got a telephone consult booked for the 14th of March. But what I will cover probably in the next episode is the criteria. It will be very specific for us in our region because it does vary. But I can give you an overview on the criteria that you have to meet in order to get NHS funding. And that is essentially where we're at right now, which is waiting for the funding, hopefully getting the green light, and then being able to start fertility treatment again. And I think when we get to that point, I'll be a bit more hopeful. Because right now I'm just in this waiting zone of, well, the IUI failed. Yes, we can keep trying naturally, but the chances of that working are very low. Like I said, I haven't even had a bleed for my last one was in December, so a month and a half really, I've not had a bleed. So I think when we can start that journey to IVF, because I know those percentage chances are so much higher, I think I'll just feel way more positive about it all. But yeah, thank you again so much for watching. I really hope this video has helped somebody else out there that's on this journey, about to be on the journey, or is, potentially just found out, like myself, that you're in a situation that means you're going to need support. If anybody else, like I said, is in the same situation as me, has low AMH, has irregular periods, potentially doesn't ovulate, please leave me a comment, say hello, because I really do want to reach as many people as I can in the fertility community, just so that we don't feel alone. I want to connect with people and I want to share my journey. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, do all those things, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.